Welcome to Million Dollar Career. I've got with my guest host, Craig Picken, President and CEO of North Star Executive Search Group. Craig specializes in aerospace and aviation. He's one of the nation's top recruiters of all people, executive level and above. Welcome to the show again, Craig.
How are Rob, you? Happy Monday. What's happening?
Yeah, man. How was your weekend? Good?
It was good. Yeah, it was good. It was quiet.
Good,
Good. Last week was so crazy. I did nothing this weekend. Watched basketball. I was on my computer, did some reading, played with the dogs. It was great.
Good, man.
So how about you?
Hey, we were born to work. Same with me. I just work, man. It's all I do. I work Saturday, Sunday. You know, I'm working so much now that when I wake up in the morning, my mind is already working. You know, it's insane.
You know, you got to know when to turn it off, but I'm kind of the same. I'm kind of the same genre. I think this is kind of when, it's hard to explain, but when you have a small business, you're thinking about things all the time.
Yeah, all the time.
And it's all the time. And, like I got the 3 dogs. I love playing with them in the backyard, and, took them for, I take them for a couple of walks each day. And, we just built a big fireplace out back and got a big heat lamp, one of the big propane heat lamps, and sat out under that. But I was on my computer, and I'm like, it's chill. We can put the headphones in, and I can listen to some music, and I'm thinking about stuff. And
there you go, man.
I love that. Those kind of weekends.
That's why you're the number one recruiter, man, nationwide in aerospace and engineering, building over $1 million a year, man. So, hey, I was reading the Wall Street Journal on Sunday morning, which I always do. I get the print edition, and I just spread it out over the kitchen table and over a cup of coffee and some bacon and eggs. And an article caught my eye. It was how to reinvent yourself and your career.
I saw that.
It was a front page article, and I read it, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then I started thinking to myself, wait a minute, this is fairly simple, how to reinvent yourself in your career. But the more important thing is, how does a company reinvent itself?
Yeah, I loved that article.
Yeah. So it's kind of the same. It's kind of the flip side of the same coin, so to speak. And I started thinking more and more about, I've had like 3 or 4 clients of mine that have completely reinvented themselves over the past anywhere from 3 to 10 years.
Yep.
I contacted them actually via email that they said it was okay if I talked about their journey. I'm not going to mention their names, but I want to talk about it, 2 or 3 of these clients and how they reinvented themselves. And I'm going to talk about 3 different ways. Company number one, let's call them, created an employee-centric culture to attract top talent. Another client, it actually changed their hiring practices completely so that they align them so that the personality, skills, and attributes of their new hires were in direct alignment with their corporate culture and the requirements of the job and the managers. And the third one, grew top line sales, insurance revenues, insurance commissions by at least 20% instead of flatlining over their previous 2 years. They actually called me into their office, actually. In all great humility, I sat down with their executives and we hammered out a plan, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But those are the 3 things. One, creating an employee-centric culture to attract top talent, growing sales by more than 20%, and altering their hiring practices to incorporate personality profiling, personality assessments to make sure that the new hires were in direct alignment. Those 3 things. So I'd be kind of curious, Craig. Have you had any experience in the last few years with maybe some of your clients or other companies that have just completely reinvented themselves? I'd be interested to hear about that.
Well, I'm going to talk 3 things. One, I love that article. And the article, the one thing about the article it said was there were no radical.
Yes.
Nobody just woke up on Tuesday and said, we're doing it differently.
Yeah, exactly.
It was a transition. And I think in my own career, look, I went from an okay job to a commission sales job with a base salary to a commission sales job with no salary. And that was where the light bulb went on. That's where I learned how to become an entrepreneur. And it wasn't immediately, it was over time. And now I don't feel, to get a salary today, I wouldn't even want it.
Yeah.
With salary comes, comes ties. And I don't want to, that's it. So I love that article, and it was talked about transition. But I love actually all three of these things that you mentioned. You talk about, creating an employee-centric culture, aligning hiring practices, and then you talk about, doing the things you need to do to create a culture where you're going to grow top line sales.
Yeah.
Companies can do all three.
Yeah.
And so I was speaking at this conference a couple months ago. It was the National Air Transportation Association conference, and it was, I think, the third time I'd spoken at it. And we talked about, my and they're all these CEOs. Or I had a canned speech I was going to do, but I was at the third day of this conference. I was one of the last speakers, and for 3 days, I'd listened to all these CEOs whine that they can't get the right people. Oh, hiring is so hard. Oh, it's crazy. Cry me a river.
Yeah.
What's the answer? Become the employer of choice.
Exactly. There you go.
You talk about creating an employer-centric or employee-centric company where people want to come work.
Yeah.
It requires thought and effort.
Yes.
To become the employer of choice where people are just banging your door down to get in.
Yeah. Well, so the first client, okay. I know the president listens to this, so I hope I don't overstate or understate what happened, but probably about 10 years ago, 10 to 11 years ago, it was 2012, he called me up. He had just taken over. The company was 13 people. And I checked him out, as I do all my new clients, and there was a lot of bad stuff on Glassdoor, and just a lot of mostly whining, tough place to work, disorganized, blah, blah, blah. He goes, Rob, he says, I want to grow this to 50 people from 13. I'm like, wow. I mean, most insurance agencies that are 13 people, 50 years later, there may be 14 or 15 people,
Right.
I mean, really, really difficult to scale up an insurance agency. So here's what this guy did. I made a list, actually. So he created a culture that everybody wanted to work there. And I still call them the Google of insurance.
There you go.
The Google of insurance. It's because they are so cool now. They're so sophisticated.
Mm-hmm.
The average age of this agency is less than, I think it's like 32 years old or something insane.
Mm-hmm.
Most insurance agencies are like, the average age is like 65 or something, most insurance agencies are all white guys. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So very diverse environment, international, young. They actually have an Academy Awards once a year at a really nice country club that's put on just like an Academy Awards. Okay. And it rewards all their employees. It's a black tie thing. Stephanie and I go. It's amazing. It's just an amazing event. And to see them call up an employee, the most improved account manager from last year, Sally Smith, and the highest sales generator, whomever. And they walk up and they get a little trophy. Everybody claps. There's a band playing. It's a festive atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
They were the first people that I know of that had collaboration software specifically designed to enable people to work remotely or at least hybrid. And this is way before the pandemic. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Software that is very client-centric. It enables the company to form a close relationship, an interactive relationship with the client. They're consistently now on the best places to work in Washington, D.C. Consistently every year. Here's one. The CEO actually used to have a small desk right in the middle of everyone else. He would take me to his corner office, and it was like nobody ever lived in this thing. There was no papers around because he was never in his corner office. He was out with the people, with the staff, all the time. It was crazy. These people worshiped this guy. Okay. beautiful, prestigious offices, high rise, client focused. They'd have social events. I mean, I wanted to work there. It was just an incredible atmosphere to work. And now everybody wants to work there.
Yeah.
Now there's 75 people.
So here's an interesting
amazing,
thing. So here's an interesting thing. I several years ago, I remember a CEO getting up in front, and it was a very sales driven culture. And the CEO sat there and said, the salespeople are at the tip of the spear. They will guide the ship. But then it was a big miss. He said, everybody else is staff.
Yeah.
Okay. So you just relegated everybody else. So you have this big sales meeting. So, you have this big sales meeting where you're like, okay, we got 10 people that we're going to really, focus the Academy Awards on. But everybody else is just, you just
really,
support. And you're like, wow, shit. I just feel good about being here. I'm just staff, good to know. You can't do that. Everybody in the organization, if you want a real sales driven culture where, performance is rewarded, everybody is important in that group. And I think about like an aircraft carrier.
Mm-hmm.
I think about an aircraft carrier. Who gets all the glory? The aviators get all the glory, right? But that 20-year-old cook down on the mess deck, his job's just as important as anybody else's. And that person needs to be made to feel important.
We always go back to like these military analogies. It's kind of funny.
Well, you could talk about a lot of things. Yeah, you talk about, I'll go to sports. Patrick Mahomes won a Super Bowl. Who was getting accolades? The trainer, the young lady who did physical therapy on his ankle.
Yes. Exactly.
I mean, you talk about bad. You think she was important? Hiring the right person.
Exactly. That's great.
For that job. Yeah. She's important.
Yeah. It's like we're doing a mission readiness exercise down on the URE forest next to Fort Bragg. And one of the guys on the team was a late substitution because you have to fill out your team with all the different functions. And it was a combat cameraman who had been a combat cameraman only because when he joined the military, he was too young to try out for special forces as an 18 X-ray. So I took this guy because I needed an engineer on the team. And he seemed like a really squared away guy. He ended up being our driver, our security, our fix-it guy. He helped out communications. He was amazing. It was because, special forces empowers and enables everybody from, like, as you said, the mess cook all the way up to the colonel, and that guy saved the day. He was amazing during that entire rotation. And at the end of the rotation, when we did the AAR, he had told me during the mission, he says, Rob, I've always wanted to be a Green Beret. Always wanted to go through SF selection, but I'm this combat cameraman. And he was so well regarded as a combat cameraman, which is an important part of a downrange squad, that he said, my superior will not let me go. He won't sign the papers to let me try out for SF. So I've been condemned to the combat cameraman. I said, really? So at the end of the rotation, and this is not really, this is not a combat downrange mission. This is a sustainment mission, undertaken in the United States. But after the mission, there's an AAR, after action review, and the colonel paid us a visit. And we were in the hangar doing AAR, and there was probably 75 people. And at the very end, the colonel says, are there any more questions? Anybody else have anything to say at all? And I knew he was in the back of the room, this combat camera guy. And I stood up, raised my hand. He says, Rob, what do you want, man? And it's like one of these things where almost nobody ever asks questions, right? You've probably been in the same situation on a carrier, right? The big brass says, any more questions? Everybody kind of sits there. I stood up and I said, there's a man in this room that wants to be a Green Beret and has never been given the opportunity. And I'm here to tell you right now, sir, I want you to consider, let's call him Jim Smith, for SF selection on my recommendation. He goes, really? He says, tell the man to talk to me after we're done here. So the combat cameraman is like totally embarrassed in the back of the room. He says, you want me to talk to this guy? Because he was the SF colonel. He was the head of 5th Group. You know? And
Sure.
Afterwards, they met. And about a month later, this guy who had my email, combat cameraman, calls me up and he says, Rob, he says, I got my papers. I'm going to selection, man. I said, no kidding. He goes, I'm going to selection. And only like 5 people out of 100 make it. But I knew this guy was going to make it, and the guy's a successful Green Beret now.
But that's the whole thing. But you see that in companies. Look, you see that people, really good people get pigeonholed. Why do they get pigeonholed? Because they're really, really freaking good at their job. And then their boss is like, that guy or that girl is so good at their job, I can't possibly leave them or let them leave.
Yeah. And the issue becomes, what are you doing for them? Yeah, everybody in life has a what's in it for me type of deal. Yeah.
And the reality of the matter is that companies need to be looking at their people going, all right, we know who's really good. What are we doing for them?
Exactly. Yeah.
But I got a search I'm working on right now. I'm about ready to kill myself on it. Or actually, I'm about ready to go reach through the phone and choke somebody else.
Yeah.
We've had, because they cannot get out of their HR heads, we've had 3 turn downs on this position.
Wow.
Why? Because it requires a relocation.
Yeah.
Second thing is that people start to do, they want the job, they like the responsibility, but then they start to look at the cost of living in the place where, the job would take them. And all of a sudden now it's a higher cost of living, high tax rates.
Yeah.
They look at their mortgages, they're going to have to dump their 3.5% fixed rate mortgage, and they're going to buy a new house at almost 7.
Wow. Yeah.
All of a sudden now they're looking at the cost of living and they're like, hey, I'm out.
Yeah.
Well, 3 in a row. And I go to the company. I'm like, one person had stock options. They were so good at their current company, they were just awarded stock options. So I went to the company and said, you're going to have to address these issues.
Yeah.
And what did they come back and say? We're not gonna. I'm like, well, there's your answer.
Search.
There's your answer. Yeah. If you're not willing to flex and be smart and do the smart thing for the people that you need to attract, you're just going to sit and wallow in your own filth.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
it's just stupidity. So that's the mark of a great company.
Yeah.
It gets collaboration at all levels. It rewards the people for their collective gains. It provides an atmosphere of collaboration.
Yeah. So the second client, okay, this was really interesting too. I don't know how many of your clients, Craig, that administer like personality profiling or assessment profiling, but I used to think that kind of a waste of time, because what it was people would have someone go through the hiring process, get all the way to the end, and then they would give them the personality profile, and it became a check in the box. Okay. Once in a while, somebody would say, well, he didn't check out as a sales guy, but I had this one client came to me. It made my job initially a lot more difficult, because a lot of these candidates that I thought were really good were getting rejected because they didn't fit the profile.
Yep.
And then finally I said, let's do the profile at the beginning of the hiring process. And they said, really? I said, yeah. Before I even submit these people, I'm going to give them this profile just to make sure that they fit the attributes. So what they did is they got back with their consultant and they designed the assessment profile, the personality profile, if you will, in accordance with their peak performers and their company culture. So they specifically designed a preferred score. Okay. So then people started taking it, and the people that scored really high were invited into the interview process. So they've already been pre-qualified to have the skills, the attributes, personality, all that kind of stuff. for the respective position, whether or not it's a sales or a non-sales position. So all the profiles had different scoring mechanisms for each one. Mm-hmm. So the only people that were interviewed were the people that had already pre-qualified. Mm-hmm. I went back over the past 3 years, 90% of those people are still working there.
Yep.
In a Wall Street Journal article this weekend, I noticed, and it might have been in that same article that you and I were talking about, the reinvention of your career article. People leave their jobs after 2.9 years now. So I'm thinking 2.9 years is the average that people stay at their jobs.
Right.
And I'm like 90% retention after 3 years.
Right.
And now I'm thinking, this is the client from heaven, because I'm able to place people who already have skills, experience, personalities in direct alignment with the corporate culture. So they're set up for success. I don't have to replace any people. So, man, I tell you, they have significantly improved their talent level just by realigning their hiring practice.
Yeah, look, I've got a private equity group I work with. The first thing they make their CEOs, any CEO prospect has to take the test. We just call it the test. I think it's a personality index. A PI. Look, those things aren't pass fail. There's no right or wrong. Everybody runs a gamut. I mean, I've taken 100 DISC tests, and everyone has told me that I'm very high on the D and the I. I'm very low on the S and the C. I'm obviously not a very touchy-feely guy. That's okay. If you're a touchy-feely environment or you're a very hierarchical environment, I'm not going to do well there. Yeah. I'd rather know that personally than, the challenge with the test. I like that, because what it does is it gets people aligned with the culture of the company.
Exactly.
Yeah. The challenge you have is people take the test and then they're not within the realm, and then you have to tell them, hey, you didn't. Look, we're not going to move forward. They're looking for different personalities. Well, what's wrong with me? Well, nothing wrong with you. It's just a very difficult conversation. It's kind of an awkward conversation to have.
Yeah, you know what? I had that same conversation, and what I tell people now is I learned the hard way by trying to explain that test, how you didn't meet the test. I would just tell them it's just not the right fit. So, I can't tell you anything more here.
I was totally embarrassed right before Thanksgiving by a C-level executive. And he had taken a personality. I knew about his profile. And the profile basically said, hey, look, he's a little less entrepreneurial. He likes structure and organization, right? And, there was a C-level role that we're looking at for him, was a little less structured and a little less organized than probably, and maybe it was my fault. But he really wanted you. But right before Christmas, he doesn't call me. He sends me a text. I need to put off. I need to, I need to delay my start date. Like, my current company gave me a counter offer. Oh you dumbass. Yeah, you should have done that. Yeah. Totally embarrassed. Yeah, totally embarrassed himself. Yeah. Embarrassed. It's like you just don't. It's not the way a C-level person reacts. But I go back to the personality profile. And I'm like,
there you go, man.
Maybe that was
those personality profiles do not lie. I'm telling you, man. Particularly in the sales area, in these sales profiles, if you're not extroverted and you're not dominant, have a dominant personality, you're just not going to be a good sales guy.
No, I disagree with that. That I don't agree with, because I've seen a lot of introverted people become very, very good salespeople. Now, they may be a little bit more introverted. They may be a little bit more methodical, but they become very trusted advisors. Now, there are some sales roles where it's you light your hair on fire type of person. There are other sales roles where, hey, we're looking more for that trusted, that trusted advisor who, is a little bit more, whatever. So
on the insurance side, it's more of a transaction. I mean,
it's transactionally related.
Insurance sales actually starts out as very transactional. It's all about activity, calling people. You have to be irrepressible, can't get your feelings hurt.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like my wife is a classic introvert, INTJ on the Myers-Briggs scale. She'd last about an hour.
Yeah.
In insurance sales, because you got to pound the phones, emails, talk to people. It's crazy. So my third client, right? So how did they grow top line sales by 20%? So they came to me and said, "Hey, Rob, we know you do executive coaching and consulting, advising, whatever. Our sales have flatlined for the last couple of years, and we're trying to get out of this funk. I mean, our salespeople really aren't motivated. We're kind of directionless. We've spent all this money on operations and marketing and blah, blah, blah. And, we're willing and able to invest some money in our sales force and rejigger things. What do you think?" So I said, "Let me come in there. I'll talk with the board, and maybe we'll talk with the sales guys, and we'll figure something out." But I told him, I said, the first thing we're going to have to do is you're going to have to put your listening hats on, and you're going to have to actively listen to your salespeople and just ask them, like, what's happening? What isn't right? What is the problem? So we had a meeting, brought the sales VP in. He said, the first thing is the commission schedule has changed 3 times in the last 4 years. My sales guys don't really know how they can make money because the commission schedule keeps changing. And as a former sales executive, the feeling, So it all came down to tracking activity. And the lead sales guy says, let's just figure out, how many phone calls it takes to get a meeting, how many meetings it takes to get a deal, how many deals we have to propose, RFPs to close a deal. So we figured out all these metrics. And then everyone agreed upon, in a room, we got everybody in the room, and everybody agreed, and it was basically a negotiation. Let's come up with a fair and reasonable commission schedule that we can all mutually agree upon. So over the course of 2 days, everyone collectively, even I had some input into what the commission schedule should be. And they agreed to hold that for the next 5 years. Management agreed to invest money into more lead generation, into a better database, something along the lines of Salesforce.com, where their activities could actually be tracked. Because believe it or not, the sales guys wanted to track their activity because they wanted to see, how am I doing against the benchmark, right? So once they figured out the metrics, everyone went to work. It was all activity driven. Again, insurance sales is probably different than aircraft sales, but insurance sales is all about how many calls, how many emails, how many social media interactions, how many RFPs, all this kind of stuff. And what they did is they posted the activity of the sales force in the coffee room on the bulletin board so that everybody could see who was making the calls, who had the meetings, what the closing ratios were. And it was extremely motivating. And everybody knew that if they hit the metrics, they were probably going to make a lot of money. And they knew if they made a lot of money, the commission schedule was not going to be changed around.
Look, it comes down to this, from a
22.7% the following year.
Yeah, to me, it's about this. It's about listening. It's about listening. And I worked for a company where the principals thought they knew it all. And they came, look, I always knew, my whole life I've been in very high-end sales. And these guys were more transactionally focused. And they thought, well, if you take a transactional approach to high-end sales, you'll be successful. Well, no, just the opposite.
Exactly.
Wealthy people don't want to be called at night.
Exactly.
Right. They don't want to be called at night. Right? It doesn't work that way. So it's about listening to your teams. Once again, it's all about listening to your teams.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And understanding, hey, look, this is, look, salespeople can whine. They can whine like nobody's business. But at the end of the day, when they're out there whining, there's usually a little bit of truth to what they're saying. And the whole thing is, hey, look, nothing makes a salesperson or anybody more mad than when you start to mess with their compensation.
Exactly.
If you promise somebody a 30% bonus and you give them a 20% bonus, well, they're pissed. Where's the rest of my bonus? So it's about listening to your people and understanding what moves the needle forward. But at the end of the day, if they come to you and say, "Hey, look, if we've got 5 barriers to sales," the answer becomes, if I remove those 5 barriers, are you going to sell more? Or are you going to produce more? Or are you going to manufacture more or whatever? That's what it comes down to. What makes me a little bit of a higher income executive recruiter than some other people? I got on an airplane last week and I dropped $1,000 to go see a client. And I had done the same thing the week before, but it was $1,500.
Yeah.
It's we do these podcasts. It's about activity that drives results. It's not just what you think. It's not just the stuff that you have in your mind.
Yeah.
It's wait a minute. It's an immersion of how do we go get business, and that's what I think. The really good companies do is they listen to everybody and they say, okay, what do we need to do to drive the needle forward 20% more next week or next year?
And you know what? I'll take that one step further. So I think it's not only actively listening, which is a major leap for a lot of people, but it's actively listening and then coming up with benchmarks or improvements, whatever you have to do, actions that are mutually agreed upon between staff and management. That's where listening comes in, because a manager or a leader can listen to his subordinates.
Mm-hmm.
But if he just goes back to his office and makes up the rules and dictates, here's what we're going to do. Okay. He listened, but didn't really do him any good. It's the leader that actually actively listens and collaborates with his subordinates and gets them to mutually agree and buy in to what we're going to do as a group. If you can do that, if you can listen and then formulate mutually agreed upon goals and objectives, that's magic in a bottle, because everyone's jumping into the foxhole at that point.
The most horrible business leader I'd ever seen. I mean, it's just, and I laugh. I sit back and I laugh, and I go, maybe this was the old days. But he would come. I was the VP of sales. And he comes in and I got all the team there, and he comes in and struts like a chicken. And he says, by the end of the year, we will sell $30 million in company real estate. And you can just see all the eye rolls out there. Yeah. And if we don't do it, you all are fired. Like, okay, here's a good message. So everybody's looking around. Looking around. And what I did, I looked at my team. I said, all right, guys, let's just go. Pack your trash now. Let's just go. Let's go. We're all fired. and the guy's just sitting there looking at me like dumbfounded. I go, based on what? Based on what? You guys aren't investing in, you're not it's a very high dollar sale. It requires a level of volume of people coming in. And we're out here in the trenches doing what we can do, but you're not doing you're not investing what you need to invest. And for you to just think that you're magically going to come in and say, everybody's going to sell $30 million of real estate or we're fired. Look, shit, I'm just leaving.
Yeah, right.
You're not going to hold that over my head.
Right.
And that's just bad. That's just bad management. It's people don't understand. Like, all right, the question becomes, if we want to sell $30 million in real estate between now and the end of the year, what needs to happen?
Exactly.
What needs to happen? All right, here's what needs to happen. Here's the commitment from all levels.
Yes.
It's going to take.
Yeah.
But that's, top-down leadership, top-down, pigeon management doesn't work anymore. It never did work.
It's got to be up and down. Again, I go back to SF. the command goes up and, it's up and down the command the chain, up and down the command chain.
Yeah.
It works both ways.
But I always love that question. Somebody taught it to me. It's like, always ask the question, based on what?
Yeah.
We want these results based on what? What's your benchmark? What's your platform? I mean, I've seen, Lisa, my wife, great finance person, used to drive her crazy because she would do a lot of consulting. And companies would just come out with these numbers. They'd pull these numbers out of thin air and they say, okay, now we're going to go project, our sales projections or revenue projections are going to be this. And she's like, based on what? Well, this number, we just pulled out of thin air.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Your foundation is air.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not going to get there. So that's the whole thing. But, look, I think at the end of the day, look, you've got three things here where it's, you create an employee culture. You become the employee of choice. You make sure that, I love the personality profiles because it makes sure that you're finding people who fit into your culture, the culture you're trying to build.
Yep.
And then the third thing, you talk about, getting everybody's buy-in and, sort of getting a kumbaya saying, all right, we're going to march forward as a group.
Yep.
And this is what it's going to take everybody to be.
That's it, man. You nailed it. Hey, Craig. So how do people get a hold of you anyways?
Craig at northstaresg.com. Or just call me at 910-231-4037.
Great. Thanks very much. I appreciate your insight. You're a great sales guy. Number one, aerospace, airline industry, all things airplanes.
We're just having a good time.
You're having a good time, man. Thanks a lot. And we'll see you next week.
Sounds good.
Thanks,
Look forward to it, Rob. See you.
All right.
Hey, I'll be right back. I hope you enjoyed the latest edition of the Aerospace Executive Podcast. You can reach out to me directly, Craig at northstaresg.com, or check us out at www.northstaresg.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, or on YouTube. Just do a search for Aerospace Executive Podcast. Thanks again. I'm Craig Piven.